Hello, my name is Kristen Bolden, and I'd like to welcome you to the other side of history. Now, in our last talk, we left off giving the history of the Medici family. Now, it was the Medici family who made a library of all the Gnostic learning. And this learning, this Gnostic learning, it became the philosophy of the Jesuit order. Now, in this talk, I would like to talk on the founder of the Jesuit order, Ignatius Loyola. Ignatius Loyola's name was originally Indigo Lopez. He was born into a noble Spanish family in 1491. This was actually just 8 years after the reformer Martin Luther. Ignatius, or actually at this time Indigo, was the youngest of a family of 13 children. He was born in the castle Loyola, which is why his last name was later changed to Loyola. His family had Catholic piety, but lax morals. His father had several children by another woman, and his grandfather's lawless behavior, it had led to the top 2 floors of the Loyola castle being demolished by order of the crown. The king at this time was King Ferdinand, and his wife was Queen Isabella. Now, Ferdinand, he united the Spanish kingdoms into the nation of Spain. The very worst thing that he did was support the Spanish Inquisition. And the very best thing that he did was to sponsor Christopher Columbus's voyages of exploration across the Atlantic Ocean. The idea that the world was round was considered at this time an attack on the Church of Rome. It was said that the world was flat, and that the Vatican was the center of the world, and the world was the center of the universe. The sun evolved actually around the earth, not the earth around the sun. Many were certain that Christopher Columbus, he would fall off the edge of the world in trying to do his voyage. Queen Isabella, she was an intelligent woman, and even as a very young girl, she loved astronomy. She studied astronomy. From the books that she read, she was certain that the world was round and not flat. It was from her encouragement that King Ferdinand actually allowed Christopher Columbus to make his voyage. As a point of interest, one of Indigo's brothers actually went on Christopher Columbus's second voyage. Indigo, he was brought up in the court of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, and he served them as a page. He was raised to be a courtier and a diplomat in service to the crown. His education was chivalric and yet academically sparse, which was typical of his class. Winning personal glory was his passion. It was said that Indigo, he was a fancy dresser, an expert dancer, a womanizer, sensitive to insult, and a good swordsman. He used his privileged status to escape prosecution for violent crimes that were committed with his priest brother at carnival time. In 1521, a very large French army attacked a fortress town. Indigo, as well as a tiny band of Spanish soldiers, were asked to defend the fortress. All were ready to surrender except for Indigo. He determined to hold off the French, single-handedly if he must. A French cannonball shattered his leg and put an end to his strong stand. The French actually admired the courage of the man so much that they carried him on a litter back home to his castle of Loyola. His leg and image, they were shattered. He was no longer the handsome, dashing courtier. His broken leg was not properly set, and the bone, it protruded in a way through the tight hose that the courtier wore, so much that it had kind of like an ugly type appearance. So Indigo, he insisted on having his leg rebroken and reset. Now remember, this was before the and aesthetic that we have today. Now, in the end, one leg, it was still shorter than the other, and Indigo, he limped for the rest of his life. While fighting the French, Indigo, he had told the other men, "Let us suffer everything rather than surrender." So this spirit of energy, devotedness, and control, he later brought into the creation of his order, of the Jesuits. The first triumphs of the Reformation, they had passed, and Rome, they called on for new forces in the hope of accomplishing the destruction of the Reformation. It was at this time that the order of the Jesuits was created. It is the most cruel, unscrupulous, and powerful of all the champions of popery. During his recuperation, Indigo, he took up the legends of it was called Flowers of the Saints. And these were fanciful books about the saints and the miracles that supposedly they did. Now, when his health was restored, he departed alone and in great secrecy for the solitary dwellings that the hermits of Saint Benedict had hewn out of the rocks of Montserrat. Now, what drove Indigo was not a sense of his sins or his need of divine grace. It was his desire to become a knight of the Virgin and become renowned through mortifications and pious works. The Virgin of Montserrat was black. This black virgin is who Indigo pledged his life to. This is why the Jesuit Pope is called the Black Pope. However, I guess today, both the main Pope which is like the White Pope, and the Jesuit Pope are both Jesuits. At Montserrat, Indigo, he received visions, and he created what is called the spiritual exercises. By the use of these spiritual exercises, he was able to become the master of man's imagination. Once the imagination was mastered, the will and the reason was also able to be mastered. Forces were then imbued, which made the individual virtually unable to resist its impulse. As Indigo bowed before the image of this black virgin, he saw Christ as a great commander, and he as a saint that would capture the world for Jesus Christ. He tortured his body and mind until, in exhaustion, he began to have dreams and visions. It was under this state that he claimed to receive the doctrine of the Jesuit order. His spiritual exercises were developed to bring novices into the same kind of mind and experience that he had. Indigo furthered his education and eventually earned a master's degree. The name on his diploma was not Indigo, but Ignatius, which he adopted actually in Paris and used for the rest of his life. While a theology student, Ignatius, he gathered a little group of men and women around him, and he brought them through his mental exercises. They would faint and fall aside. They would scream and pass out. This was demonic activity that this man was involved in. Ignatius gathered some of the brightest university students around him, and he formed his order. The Jesuits, or the Society of Jesus, it was founded on August 15, 1534. The order was sanctioned by Pope Paul III, and he did this in September 27 of 1540. So for 30 days, Ignatius's disciples, they were told what to think, how to feel, when to groan, when to sigh, what to imagine. They were to cut off all normal emotion. Their minds controlled their emotions. They would afflict their bodies in different ways until they had gained the mastery over all emotion. One of the quotes from the spiritual exercises was, quote, "I will believe that the white that I see is black, if the hierarchical church defines it," end quote. Those of the Jesuit order, they were cut off from the earthly ties and any kind of human interests. They were dead to the claims of natural affection, reason, and conscience. They were wholly silenced, and they knew no rule, no tie, but that of their order. And they knew no duty but to extend its power, the power of their order. The gospel of Christ had enabled its adherents to meet danger and to suffer great suffering, endure much suffering. They were undismayed by cold and hunger and toil and poverty. And also, they were able to uphold the banner of truth in the face of the rack, the dungeon, and the stake. Now, to combat these forces, Jesuitism, they inspired their followers with a fanaticism. This fanaticism, it enabled them to endure like dangers and to oppose the power of truth with all of the weapons of deception. There was no crime that was too great for them to commit, and there was no deception too base for them to assume. Vowed to perpetual poverty and humility, it was their studied aim to secure wealth and power and to be devoted to the overthrow of Protestantism and also to reestablish the papal supremacy. So while appearing as members of their order, they would wear a garb of sanctity. They would visit prisons and hospitals, and they would minister to the sick and the poor. Their profession was that they had renounced the world, and that they bore the sacred name of Jesus, who went about doing good. But under this blameless exterior, the most criminal and deadly purposes were often concealed. It was a fundamental principle of the Jesuit order that the end justified the means. So this blind obedience created by the Jesuits is what some haters of liberty would like to make out of every person living on this planet. They would like a world with absolute submission and for everyone to live in perfect obedience to a human authority. To be moved and directed by their superiors, just as though people were dead bodies, allowing themselves to be carried anywhere and to be treated in any manner whatever. The Jesuit order is also master of creating jealousy and hatred between people. Also states or provinces and countries that were at one time at peace. They are largely responsible for the wars and the bloodshed that we have seen. This order, it hates independent and prosperous people, communities and governments and countries. Now, right now, there is a very active agenda to lead people's minds into a different state. Changes are being made in an attempt to shift people into a different way of thinking and acting. Have you ever felt pressured into complying with something that you did feel uncomfortable with? The request, it seemed to be small and perhaps even reasonable. Did you ever feel a peer pressure from others, watching what you would do? Did you feel uncomfortable in complying, but also felt uncomfortable in not complying? What I can tell you is that when you surrender to the violation of any God-given right, your resistance, it actually breaks down. And trust me, the orders, they are only going to get bigger. Doubts and unbelief are being promoted towards the principles that have made the United States of America a prosperous and a free nation. There are also men who have seen stealthy hands slipping the bolts so that these leaders of tyranny might gain power, and they have held their peace, apparently indifferent to its results. Today it seems that the whole world is being formed into secret societies. The Jesuits are masters in deceit and creating confusion. once a person takes their bait, it does seem almost impossible to break the spell that Satan casts over them. Let's determine to know for ourselves what is of God and what is of Satan. What is truth and what is error? What is good and what is evil? I believe that there is nothing that the great deceiver fears so much as that we become acquainted with his devices. Satan can most readily control the minds of those who are unconscious of his influence. Let's never allow anything to take the place of God and his word in our minds and hearts. I hope you have enjoyed this little talk. If you have, I'd encourage you to click on that like and subscribe button. Leave your comments. And I just want to thank you for listening. And I'm praying God's blessings upon each one of you.